Welcome. This is EDLD 7308, Ethical Leadership and Governance. My name is Dr. Julie Fernandez. I am the Dean of the College of Education and Behavioral Sciences, and I will be your narrator through your slides for this class this semester. This is an unusual thing for me to do, so I apologize if I sound choppy at times. It's different to be able to narrate on a PowerPoint slide instead of seeing you face to face. But I do welcome you to our program, and I welcome you to this class. Ethical leadership and governance is one of my favorite classes to teach, mainly because I'm a former school principal and a school leader in a district, and now as dean of the college, ethics is something that is constantly on my mind. How well can I manage my work and stay within my ethical boundaries, both for my profession, for the care of people, for equity, and for my own personal, connecting it to my own personal ethical values. So I look forward to having this journey with you and participating as you work through your own challenges of determining what your personal ethics are connected to the work that you do. So this is Module 1, and your course objectives for Module 1 is to analyze and critique ethics, theory frameworks, values, virtues, and moral conflict, differentiate organizational policies using an ethical framework of justice, critique, care, and community, and explore your personal leadership preference and how they influence your behavior as leaders. We will also be reviewing different theories of ethics, along with reviewing the biblical connection to our ethical development, values development. Now I'd like to start a lecture with a question. So when you think about ethics, what are you thinking this topic is about? Is it the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? Is it what people see you do, or what you do without anybody knowing you're doing it? So what do you think? What is ethics? Is it the individual rights versus community standards? What are key factors that should be incorporated in the term of diversity? That's an interesting question. I hope that you think that ethics is connected to supporting equity in diverse communities. So what does that mean, and how does that work in your life? Take some time and reflect on that, and we'll be coming back in a minute in the next slide, and we'll be expanding those thought processes. We as leaders, whether it be in a school or an organization, are expected to understand our communities and be able to take into account that community and make sure that the decisions that we make are ethical, moral, and right overall. I just can't think of another way to say that. You got to do the right thing for the right reasons, and not for personal gain, but for what's best for your community, be it you're working in a school or some kind of organization, a clinic if you're working in mental health and human services. You have to do the right thing at all times. But that's difficult depending on your own personal core values. So as a quick write, what is leadership in your mind? What do you believe leadership is? Most of you have taken the Theory of Leadership course, and you were to write your own theory of leadership. So this is trying to connect ethical values to what you believe is what a good leader is. And then how do you recognize when leadership is ethical? What is that? What happens when you're watching a leader that you say, you know, I can trust that person because they are ethical? What does that look like? That's, not something I'm expecting you to respond to because I can't hear you at this moment, but I want you to be thinking about that, because in that sense, what are people looking to you as a leader, and what do they expect from you if you say you are an ethical leader? Well, one aspect of leadership that you might have read in the McManus textbook, it says a process that includes the work of leaders and followers accomplishing a goal in a particular context, all the while influenced by cultural values and norms. So basically, this is saying that leadership is that working together for a common goal, and you can have one leader or multiple leaders in that process. I'm thinking of a school district in this example. So in a school district, you usually have a superintendent who is the main leader, and then you may have associate superintendents below him on the, as I call the food chain, and then it goes down to the principals, and the principals down to the teacher leaders, and the teacher leaders down to the teachers, and the teachers down to the students. And this whole pyramid of working together for the common good of the children that are in those schools, or in that district. Who are we addressing, and how are we solving problems together in an ethical manner? It's meeting that goal, being that goal of high test scores, or the goal that you have a community that's working together for what's best for children so all children can learn. It's really based on the values and the norms and the belief systems. What's interesting is if you have a leader that does not believe all children can learn, then that's going to trickle down into a inequitable distribution of materials and supplies and quality teachers into the schools that need them the most. So it is quite a challenge. I've been in school districts in which there was the favorite school by the superintendent, and that school seemed to get more resources than the rest of us. And it was difficult to compete and work within that system because the superintendent had his or her own vision on what was the context and values that they needed to work in. The parents in that school were very much an influence on the superintendent and made a lot of demands on him or her. And I'm not going to say where I was, but anyway, and that influence, because the students in other schools or parents in the other schools did not have that kind of influence on the superintendent, they didn't get as many resources or the best resources. So you've got to work within the organization, the values, and it does depend on the leader. What does the leader value, and what do they see needs to be done, and how do they envision this? I'm going to give you another example of a positive leader. And he has no idea I'm going to mention his name, but Dr. Rodney Watson works in the Spring ISD school district, and I've known him for many, many years. And I watch how he is working so hard on making sure that every student in all of his schools are treated equitably, that they're treated kindly, that they are given the best teachers. And he's worked really hard with his own leadership to make sure that it is communicated that every child is worthy. Every child has worth, and their parents have worth. And that has really changed the school district as a whole, and it's showing marked improvement based on his leadership. So this is just something to think about, is how does that leader take his cultural values and norms and his own personal belief system to be able to influence others towards improving an organization. So the questions now I'm going to lead you to are, how does your definition compare to the definition the authors in Ethical Leadership, the primer? How do you see leadership affecting ethical values? How does outside factors impact the leadership role? And outside factors are something that you cannot deny. There are pressures put on organizations by outside factors, and that those pressures may in turn change the leadership's core values. To give you an example, that if you were in a business and the outside factors were the economy, and you noticed that your company's values were going down, you were losing money, because you refuse to make a certain widget. Now, if this widget if your company would make a lot of money off of. And if this widget, though, impacted a community negatively, say it's a widget that it was radioactive. I'm making this up as I'm going here, but anyway, if it was radioactive, and the fact that if you made the widget and you could sell that widget and your company would make tons of money, but the outcome of making that widget in that community would cause death and illness in that community, would it be the right thing for you to do? So, personally, you're like, well, no, that would be wrong to do that. But then you're getting pressure from the outside to make that decision. And that's when you determine whether or not you're going to walk away based on whether something is right or wrong. If that helps the community, it hurts the community, but it helps your company. This question comes up a lot in education. There was a school district in Atlanta where the test scores were very, very low, and the superintendent came in and she decided, well, we're going to kind of help ourselves out in this process by doing some tweaking of the tests and various other things that happened, and they got caught. And they were put in jail, they were in trouble, but they were, I think, and they did not do the right thing overall. However, I could see why that temptation was out there, that, my job, my reputation, and everything is based on whether or not school test scores are high, and they're not getting high. So I got to find some way to tweak it so that it looks like we're going high on our test scores and our students are improving. And then you get down that rocky road of, do I do the right thing and just keep working with my students and deal with the negative press on the fact that the test scores aren't rising, or do I tweak it? Unfortunately, she chose, I'm going to tweak the scores, and then she influenced a lot of people in that process, and so a lot of people went down after that. So those outside factors can affect your leadership decision making, and it's whether or not your moral compass stays steady, and that's the biggest challenge of leadership. So your ethical leadership, a primer, McManus goes into different theories of ethics, and Kantianism, or known as Kant's ethic, is based on understanding what the moral duty of leaders and followers. So Kant spends a lot of time kind of mulling over what is the moral duty of leaders and their followers. Do you have goodwill and you act out of duty? Do you do it just because you have to, or because somebody's watching you? Is there an action that makes an action morally significant? That's an interesting question. What is moral? What is right? Kant maintains that the action is morally praiseworthy only when it is done with the right motive or goodwill. So are you doing something right for the right reasons? I think is basically the translation for that. So this goes on, and we do have some critics. I'm not going to read the chapter for you and go through this, but I'm mainly asking you to read these chapters and then reflect in these PowerPoints, or just to kind of help you think about what you're reading. It's interesting that critics state that this theory allows no room for exceptions to the moral requirements. You need to read carefully the 5 practical ways that Kant's ethics can help leaders and followers make morally sound decisions. It kind of gives you a little bit of a primer there of what to do and what not to do when you're trying to make morally sound decisions. The biggest challenge here is whose morals, whose moral values. Every community, every culture has its own unique set of moral values. What we would say is acceptable or a moral value here in the United States might be different in a third world country, depending on the needs that people have. I know that there are some countries that where young women are abused physically and emotionally and abused because they are women. Well, that's a part of their cultural values on women. However, in the United States, some of you may say, yes, women are morally attacked here. There's moral values that attack women, but I don't think so. I think that that can be interpreted in different ways. But who sets that moral value? Who sets that requirement is based on the community and the culture. So it gets this is one of those discussions you probably have over a glass of wine and you try to decide, okay, what's morally required in our society and how is that different from other societies and what's right and what's wrong. Okay, so the goal of Kant's theory. It's the goal of the leader and followers upholding their moral duty to behave ethically regardless of the surrounding contextual and cultural factors. I get this. This is basically saying no matter where you are, you have to uphold your moral values. I don't know how hard that is, but it is because you end up in different contexts. There's stresses put on people to be successful. It's challenging, but you have to uphold it no matter what. You can't say you are the exception or say because this situation is this way, I'm not going to abide by my ethical values. So you have to uphold your moral duty no matter where you are, what you're doing, or how you're doing it. You've got to focus on it as what is correct. I tell my own daughters, I said, you have a moral compass. And it doesn't matter whether you're in our house or in your school or at your place of work, that moral compass cannot change. What is right is right. It's right here. It's right there. It's right everywhere. You don't hurt people. You just don't talk bad to people. I don't care where you are. And I don't care if they're doing it to you. You have to uphold your values wherever you go. Okay, so the summary of Kantianism, he believes that goodwill is in our control and consequences for actions are out of our control. Wow. Doing what is right because it is right with no other ulterior motives. Doing good is their moral imperative. How can we determine our moral imperative? Wow, you have to really dig deep in what you believe in and what is right and what is wrong. The absolute moral requirement, you need to respect humanity. You need to respect people for who they are, where they are, and what comes wherever you are. You have to respect people for who they are. I love this. Would I want my action to become a universal law? Okay, so I'm doing this lecture in the middle of this coronavirus situation that we're in. We're in week 1. And it comes out to the hoarding that is happening in the grocery stores right now. And good people, and I'm saying good people with good moral values, I'm sure they all go to church, some of them, are hoarding food, hoarding toilet paper of all things. And there isn't really any logical reason why they're doing that other than out of fear. So how are people helping other people in this process? I live in Houston. Houston's a great city, and Houston, during Harvey, poured out its heart to the people that were hurt and by the flooding. They spent money and time helping each other get through this. That whole situation with the flooding, that was the best of us. I would hope that the actions of this period in time in our life show the best of who we are as humans, that we help each other no matter where we are. And even with social distancing, we're sending out love and encouragement to other people. That should be our universal law. This is one of those moments that I really wish that I was sitting in front of all of you and we were having this conversation over a cup of coffee. because I know your answers would be very interesting and deep and philosophical. I think we could just spend hours having these conversations. These are 3 questions that I think you need to reflect on as we work through this process. If an organization achieves their goals, does it mean they have an effective leader? That goes back to what is an effective leader? You could say Hitler was an effective leader. They had goals. They met what goals they needed to meet up to that certain point. They pulled themselves out of a depression at that time period. But is there a difference between being an effective leader and a morally sound leader, an ethical leader? I think you could debate that. What if the leader degrades teachers and micromanages the staff? Is that good or bad? Well, I'm sure many of you have that opinion, whether it be a teacher, a leader that is micromanaging and degrades people. If you get the outcome you want, does that make that person a bad leader? If they get the outcome. I've seen schools in which the leadership was so they just worked people so hard to the point they didn't have a lot of positive interactions with teachers, yet the test scores came up because out of fear. But that's not sustainable. People don't stay. Teachers don't stay. They leave. As I tell people, they vote with their feet. If they're not happy where they're working and they can find a better situation, they leave. So they can't sustain development or improvement in schools or an organization if the leader is that way. What if the leader has been directed by the superintendent to meet the goals at no cost? Wow, that happens all the time. I've had that threat. I've had that moment when I walked into a assistant superintendent's office and said, pull those scores up or you're fired. And that is when I had to step back and say, okay, I'm doing everything I know that is right. I'm trying to work with my teachers and my students. I'm trying every method. Really, you're not helping me by making that threat. So I will tell you in truth, I was in charge of a turnaround school, and I got to the point where I told my teachers, which was totally against everything I believed in, guys, we're only going to teach the test. The minute that came out of my mouth, I realized I need to quit doing what I'm doing. That was totally against my values in education. I believe we teach kids everything, not just what's on the test. I think we give them a expansive education over multiple areas. I don't throw out social studies so I can teach more reading and math. I can teach social studies and within there teach reading and science and everything. And so the moment that came out of my mouth, we are only going to teach the test, I literally walked into my office and wrote my resignation. I just couldn't live with myself because I did not believe in that, but I felt the pressure from above to make that school successful. Yes, we made recognized. That was the rating system back then. I left. That was not sustainable. It just wasn't the way we had set it up. So those are really tricky questions I need you to reflect on. So now we're going to get into Shapiro's book. Shapiro, and I cannot say that Jacqueline's last name, Stekfovic. Yes, you may laugh now because I can't say the last name, but Shapiro is basically what I refer to this book. I am sorry to the second author. These are dilemmas. You're going to spend a vast majority of this class reading ethical dilemmas and you dissecting these dilemmas and like really reflecting on what is this about? What should we do differently? What's right? What's wrong? What would I do in this case? I really need you to be challenged in this class to really reflect upon your own moral code, your own ethical codes of your profession, of your life, your personal codes, what's right, what's wrong. So Shapiro views these through multiple paradigms. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. And as we develop through the course, you're going to read more about these and develop your own ideas behind each of these types of ethics. So we have the ethics of justice, ethics of critique, ethics of care, and ethics of the profession. So let's go on and talk a little deeper about each one of these. All right, so first we have the ethics of justice. This is individual rights and laws. I mean, this is what we look at for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the rules and policies in organizations, in the schools. So what you have to do when you're reflecting upon these ethical dilemmas, you need to understand whether there's a law or a right or a policy that relates to this particular case. Does that exist? I'm going to be influenced based on my influence for my decision on this dilemma based on the rule of law. Will I get arrested if I make the wrong decision here? I hate to say it that way. You shouldn't live in fear, but if there's a law that protects a group of people, like say Title IX protecting women's sports, I can't go through and eliminate all women's sports and keep all the men's sports because I like football better than I like softball. There's a law, there's a policy, there's a reason why Title IX is around. If it does exist, should it be enforced? Well, yeah. Could you challenge it? Yeah, because we had Jim Crow laws way back when that needed to be challenged. It was a law at one point, but it's not correct. So there you have to really sit back and say, is this law appropriate? But then don't just go against it without really challenging the legal system. And finally, if there is no law, right, or policy, should there be one? Possibly. I, as a dean, have a lot of situations that arise, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't have a policy about that, but there should be a policy because that's not fair to other students if we allow some students to do this and other students not to do this. So, I mean, we really need to go back and think about, I hate to crowd our handbooks and say we have to have a rule for everything. But do we have to have a rule? And is that rule going to protect others in this process? Interesting thing to think about. Oh boy, we're going to get to the ethic of critique. So is the leader's sensitivity to the inequities of social class, race, disability, gender, and other differences that occur in the community? Wow, this is really in the news. This is very authentic in our challenges in our leadership. Are we making decisions that are not biased? How do we identify our bias? For those in one class I taught, because I taught the last leadership theory class, in class we tried to reflect upon what are our biases based on who we consider as leaders in our life. Who do we trust? And we have to constantly challenge ourselves to reflect on our leadership decisions based on making sure that we're not unethical in sense of providing equitable opportunities to all people. Questions to think about is who makes the rules, laws, and policies? Do we have a diverse group of people that are working together to make the rules and laws and policies? Who benefits from them? Wow, we can go there all day long. That could be an argument of, are the rules only made for rich white people? I mean, I don't know. It's crazy. We have to sit back and figure out, are there all of our laws and policies in our schools and our organizations, are they fit for all people or just for a selected few? Who has the power to enforce these laws? I was laughing that there was some rules and laws that are in the state of Texas that nobody enforces anymore. And so why do we have that? I tell teachers, when you create your rules in your classroom, make sure they're equitable, but if you don't enforce it 100% of the time, it's not a rule. It's nothing. So remove it, please. And find out whose voice are silenced in the debate. Okay, so we came up with recently in the news a young man here in Texas who had very long dreadlocks, and there was a rule that boys could not have long hair, and he was going to be kept from graduating or walking in the graduation ceremony. He'd graduate, but he just wouldn't walk in the ceremony based on the fact that he had very long dreadlocks and hair. This came up. He's African American, and a lot of people felt this was a very racially motivated rule and law and policy, and the district was going back and forth on whether it was right. And I honestly was thinking, hey, girls have long hair. What's the difference? Boys have long hair. Girls always have had long hair, and there's never been an issue. And has this disrupted learning, the fact that he has long dreadlocks? Obviously not, if he qualified to graduate. So this is an interesting debate because whose voices, this is an old policy that had gotten around back in the 1960s or earlier. Is it appropriate? Is it appropriate for this time in our history? It's a great debate to ask about. Granted, now all the graduations have been canceled, so nobody's going to be walking across stages. So I guess but I think it's a good debate to have. What laws do we have and that are no longer appropriate for the times that we are living in? What laws do we need to add because of the times we are living in? But let's make sure that we have all the voices involved. You should not be making a rule or a policy by yourself in a room and it's just your personal opinion. That's what you think the rule should be. You should involve all stakeholders into that discussion because you might be missing something that you're not familiar with in that community. Oh, the ethics of care. Do leaders show care, concern, connection with stakeholders in solving an ethical dilemma? I, as a principal, had and I have it as a dean also, I have a crew of people that I trust, and it's usually a very diverse group of people, and we all come together, and when I have a decision that I have to make, I ask them whether or not this is a right decision or wrong decision. I ask for other people's opinions. I rarely, if ever, make decisions and enforce a new rule or policy without asking other people's opinions about it, because there might be a piece that I'm missing. For example, so I had a rule in my elementary school about rolling backpacks. This was a big issue way back when. I'm aging myself here. And all of a sudden we had rolling backpacks everywhere, and kids were tripping over them, and it was becoming an issue, and kids were walking down the hall. I'm an elementary school principal, so yeah, it just became a very crazy issue. So I was to the point of we're banning rolling backpacks, or kids have to carry the backpacks, they can't roll them down the hallway, which I brought in my assistant principal, my instructional specialist, my school counselor, and my secretary actually, and one teacher, and we all sat together, and I said, okay, so if I get rid of this rule, what are the consequences of this rule? If I get rid of the backpacks or tell kids they have to carry them, they can't roll them, is this going to affect people negatively? What am I walking into? Because I really do care about kids not tripping over each other down the hallway. So I had one say, well, the reason they're rolling them is because the backpacks are too heavy and they're hurting their backs. Good point. So does that mean that we're asking kids to carry too much in their backpacks? So they feel like they need to roll them. What are they carrying in their backpacks? We had to go through a lot of different problem-solving modes of trying to figure out why are they carrying rolling backpacks. It's just a fashion. It's just a thing right now. And so those questions that you see below, who will benefit from what I decide? Well, from that decision, I ended up telling kids they couldn't roll their backpacks. I actually had parents really angry with me. But I said, let's look in the backpacks and make sure that if you're carrying them, they're not so heavy. And we found kids that were carrying things that they shouldn't have been carrying at all. We had one boy who carried all of his books to and from school. That was not needed. He didn't need to do that. It was just silly. Um, did I hurt anybody in my actions? What were the overall long-term effects of the decision that I made? And overall, it just kind of went away after a while. And kids, it's not in fashion anymore. Kids don't roll around backpacks anymore. And it ended up that when I made that decision at my school, other principals made the same decision at their schools, and it kind of went away. So these are just questions that you have to ask yourself when you're in care, thinking about all the situations. Please don't make decisions in a vacuum, so to speak. You need to ask other people so that you can get a full range view of the causes and the effects of a decision you make. All right, next is ethics of the profession. Depending upon the profession you are in at this time, and I know that we have a variety of professions of people working on this degree at this time, every profession has a code of ethics. Almost every single one of them. You just have to look it up. There's a code of ethics for counselors. There's a code of ethics for school leaders, superintendents. There's a code of ethics for teachers. There's a code of ethics for medical personnel. I mean, do no harm is a medical code of ethics. For us, for educators, it's do what's right for kids, to help children. So you really need to investigate what your code of ethics is for your profession. If you have not looked it up, you can find it online and see if does that mesh with what your code of ethics is. It needs to connect. It can't be something that are opposites of each other, or you shouldn't be in that profession if you don't accept that code for that profession. Then maybe that's not your profession you should be in. The reason why we have these codes is so there's some consistency beyond all of the people within that profession. So all doctors do no harm, and that gives the community a sense of trust and makes the community trust their doctors because they know all doctors have that same code of ethics. Unfortunately, we have doctors that break that code, but then those are those outliers that we can identify, and they can get sued. It affects them in the court of law, of lawsuits and so forth if you're working outside of that code of ethics. I really have to keep going back to the fact that when for schools people, so what should I do to serve the best interests of the students who are diverse in their composition and needs? It's really being able to understand that the same code of ethics for schools, principals and superintendents is the same no matter what kind of school you're in. Doesn't matter where you are, it's the same thing. And you can't say, well, I cannot abide by that ethical rule because I'm at school A. When I was at school B, it was easy, but at school A, well, it's weird and I can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. The code of ethics for educators is very broad, but most of it is that every child is worthy. Every child should be able to learn, and your job is to make sure that every child is given every opportunity to do and learn as any other child gets. Doesn't matter who they are, what their race, their economic background, their cultural background, their gender, their disability. It does not matter. Each child deserves a quality education, period. No debate. That's the way it is. Okay, personal code of ethics. Now this just kind of brings this all back down because nothing works for the previous ethics that we discussed of justice, care, critique, or profession if you don't understand your own sense of ethical code. You don't have a code. I'm sure most of you do. We asked that question as part of your interview before you got into the program. When were you in an ethical dilemma and how did you solve it? And some of you had actually said, I've never been in an ethical dilemma. I doubt that very seriously. I just don't think you could have thought of it right at the moment of the question. I think we're always faced with moments of whether or not we do something that is right and ethically correct, morally right. But you need to understand that. But once you said it, you said it. You don't break what you believe. Are you willing to die for it or lose your job for this? I taught this class, and an assistant superintendent was in my class, and we were having the same conversation with one of the dilemmas that you'll probably read out of the Shapiros Book. And it was mainly that you were given a directive from your superintendent to do something that you knew in your heart and mind and soul was not the right thing to do. Would you do it? And a lot of the younger students in the class, teachers, said, well, if the boss tells me to do it, I'm going to do it. And this wise assistant superintendent said, I would quit. If it goes against my personal code of ethics, my professional code of ethics, legal code of ethics, I'm sorry. I will resign there. I have no problem with doing that. And some people are afraid to do that because they think, oh, I'll be out of a job. I'll never get to do this kind of job. No, others will respect you for it if you can find why you left. But you have to know your heart, who you are, and why you're doing what you're doing, and where the line in the sand is, and willing to say, I will not do that. I go back to what happened in Germany in World War II. There were people, I am sure, that were not comfortable with killing other people in the Holocaust. And then their blame was, well, I was told to do it. I'm sorry. That is not an excuse. That is not acceptable. You cannot do something that you know is wrong. Are you willing to deal with the consequences of standing by your own ethical code? It's an interesting thought. Now, within every class, I will make a biblical connection to the topic. And honestly, ethics and our Christian worldview are so connected, it's actually made this pretty easy. We're going to start from the beginning, and you always start at the beginning in Genesis. And the scripture that I'm going to quote here starts from the very beginning when God made man. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, to rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the air, over the livestock, over the earth itself, and every creature that crawls upon it. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the seas and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth. It's Genesis 1:26 through 28. So within this context, God created man, and man in general, meaning man and woman, male and female, to rule over the earth. He gave us the freedom of choice. And unfortunately, that kind of went haywire at the Tree of Knowledge. We ended up learning way more than we needed to, and we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And God gave us freedom of choice. But his job that he has given man, in general, men and women, is to take care of the planet that he has provided for us and the people within this planet. So let's dissect this a little bit and see what this means. So I found an article, and which I'm going to probably use quite often. It's called "The Bible and Ethics: Studies for Individual or Group Studies" by Gooding and Lennox. And I'm going to glean some information from them that I thought was very thought-provoking. And it says that the Bible teaches that man's body is in itself good, and its natural appetites are good and are to be enjoyed. Though, of course, controlled and not perverted. So what that really means is that God said, and this is good. I mean, he was really happy with his creation of man. And he made them distinct from the animals in the likeness of God. So what does this mean? This means in the first place that man was made to be God's representative, to act as God's viceroy, I love that word, among all God's other creatures on earth, to control and see after them, to be the king of the earth. Okay, so he left us in charge of taking care of the planet and everything on it. This is a high dignity of great responsibility. Man represents God to the other creatures. He must not therefore abuse them or cause them unnecessary suffering. So he's like, go out there and take care of everything, but I don't want you to take care of it. I don't want you to abuse it. I don't want you to tear it apart. I don't want you to hurt them. And think of that. I mean, we have animals that are now extinct because of our abuse to the animals that are out there. It means that human life is sacred and inviolable. You may destroy your computer if it does not please you. It's a machine, but you're not to murder anybody. Man is made in the image of God. Man has infinite value. God loves all of us. He values us. He doesn't want us to hurt each other. Man's value does not depend on being clever or rich or powerful or beautiful or healthy, but simply this great fact that each human being is made in the image of God. That's why we must not kill our children by abortion before they are born, nor children after they are born, if they are weak or handicapped, nor grandmother when she gets old or troublesome, nor must we despise any human being, however poor. He who despises the poor reproaches his maker, says the Bible. In Proverbs 14:31. So basically what we're saying is we're supposed to be taking care of each other. We can't just get rid of things of people because they're annoying or they're inconvenient. God gave us the ability to love and take care of other people. This is like God's ethical code of taking care of each other. It goes on. I love the points that Gooding and Lennox makes when he talks about that God made races of the world out of the first original pair of human beings, and there are no inferior human beings. Nobody is below us. I love that about our faith. There are no sects, meaning good, high, level, middle, and low. We are all created equal, no matter who we are. In God's eyes, we are all the same. And it doesn't matter about our color, our language, it doesn't matter. He sees us all as equals, human beings, loved by him. That's what I love about this faith, is that I can't sit there and say that I am better than anybody else. All racism, anti-Semitism, and oppression of ethnic minorities is sinful and insult to God. See, God has already set an ethical moral standard. From day one, he said, you're to love each other. It doesn't matter. I love this, this guy adds this also, that women too are made in the images of God. Women were created as helpers, and helpers is translated as someone who is acting as God to help man. So we're not doing the work for the male counterparts we have. We are to be working together, side by side. And we have to honor what women bring to the table. We have to honor everyone. So when we talk about ethics in this class, we are going to be connecting back to what is God's point of view? What is the Christian point of view on ethics? We will go through what Jesus sees as ethical behavior and how he models that in his ministry and what we're called to do. It might be some of you are not of the Christian faith, or may not agree with some of the things that I'm bringing up today. But I just want to say that we have to take that into account, because there are people that in the name of the Christian faith do bad things. In the name of, I'm a Christian, so I'm going to do this, and it's not right. So this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Is your faith and what you believe in your spiritual life connected to your profession? Is it connected to your care for others? Is it connected to the ethics of critique? It all goes back. I'm hoping that during this class, you are going to be able to reflect upon yourself and what you believe and why you believe it and whether or not you're going to stand by it. Okay, so let's talk about the process in this course. You will be reading lots of ethical dilemmas, and you're going to reflect on them. You're going to start this individually by yourselves for the first few weeks, and then you'll have some discussion questions that you will be doing every week. You're going to read the questions after a dilemma, and you're going to respond to those questions individually first. And then you're going to be broken up into groups, and you're going to have, by Blackboard Collaborate, you're going to have some discussion groups where your group has to have a conversation. Now, this cannot be written. This has to be verbal. You guys got to talk together. This is a lot easier in a classroom where I can group people together and they can have these conversations and I can listen to them. So we're going to, after you have your discussion as a group, you're going to be writing a reflection on that and how you felt. Halfway through, you'll do 2 weeks with one group, and then the groups will be mixed up again, and you will be with some different people. But I want you to take care of each other through this process, and I'll go through my expectations there in a moment. You want to connect the dilemmas to the different paradigms and ethics that we talked about today, the ethics of law and profession and personal code of ethics and critique and care. I want you to really connect those in these dilemmas. And in the process, I want you to continue to develop your own personal code of ethics. You will be writing something about yourself in this course, and I want you to really reflect on what you believe is right and wrong and what you will stand by to the end. And finally, just to give you some guidance when you're in these discussions, engage mentally and emotionally. Don't tear people apart, though, okay? Sometimes people will say things that you totally disagree with, but do that. Be careful. Just be sweet to each other. Speak honestly with consideration and respect to others and their perspectives. People come from different places and have different experiences. That's how you develop your own personal code of ethics. It's based on your experience of what you've gone through. And if you've gone through a negative situation, your perspective is going to be different. Accept ambiguity before expecting decision making. People may go all different directions in their discussions until they kind of hear from different perspectives to help them determine it. Remember, I told you I normally call the people in when I have a big challenging question of changing a policy, and then after I hear their voices, I end up understanding more so that I can make a better decision. Maintain confidentiality. You're going to get names of people that are in your group, and I would ask you not to go on Facebook or anywhere else and say, Joe Smith in my class, he said this, I can't believe it. No, please. We're all learners right now. We're in the process of learning, so give people some grace here in this process. Speak up. Don't keep yourself to yourself. It contributes to our development. Speak up. Say what's on your mind. That's okay. You can do that in a healthy manner, in a professional manner. Keep personal experiences to a minimum. You all have about an hour on your group discussions. And if somebody goes off into a tangent about something that happened to them 5 years ago, blah, 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 and they're spending like 30, 40, 50 minutes, somebody needs to step in and say, that's a great story, but let's get back to the focus of our conversation here. This isn't a pulpit. And try not to dominate this conversation. Make sure that everybody is contributing. And if you don't hear a voice, but you only hear one voice, let your professor know that there's one particular person that won't let anybody else talk or is not treating people respectfully, and allow the professor to manage that, whoever's teaching this course. Well, I really hope that this first audio lecture was okay. I mean, again, this is not my typical mode for teaching. I usually like to have that interaction with students so they're all talking back at me at the same time I'm talking. Hopefully this was a good first module, and I hope I get better in the future modules. Have a wonderful day. God bless and take care.